Let's talk more about the vegetable oil piece because this does tie in nicely to what we're talking about. If somebody does incorporate those, their LDL will go down, like I mentioned before. But let's talk about the history of those, when they came on the scene, and why they're a bad idea for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah. So I have to like do a little tiny bit of self promotion here, which is that my book was the first to really establish to put seed oils on the scene. Like I actually brought the term seed oils from the rarefied world of seed oil scientists, oil chemists, they're called, whom I had spent like 2 years interviewing, brought that to the public attention. Also, was the first really to sketch out their history, which was started they you know they really began to be produced as a byproduct of the cotton crop in the uh, south of the United States. They started to crush cotton seeds into cottonseed oil. That was the first oil that was in large scale production, and they used that uh, primarily as a lubricant for machinery because whale oil, which had previously been used to uh, as a lubricant for really for the industrial revolution, in which there were so many more machines, needed so much more oil, but the whales were hunted out by the mid 1800s or so. And so cotton seed started to be produced, or maybe a little bit later, 1870s, started to replace whale oil for this lubrication use. Then in 1911, Procter and Gamble, who there was one was a soap maker and the other was a candle maker, and but those are both made from fats. They made this. They figured out the process of hydrogenation, whereby you could take an oil and harden it, because an oil, when it's just an oil, is very unstable and goes rancid quickly, and so they hardened it through this process of hydrogenation, and then they looked at this stuff that they had. They bleached it white, and they're like, well, it looks a lot like lard, so let's try to convince the American population, American housewives, that this substance should replace lard in their home kitchens, and they called it Crisco. And that there was a massive marketing campaign behind that. They were trying to convince women that these and American housewives are especially susceptible to this because many of them were immigrants, had left their grandmothers behind, and they wanted to assimilate and be modern. The modern thing was an oil or fat that was produced in industrial kitchens. None of the stench of the slaughterhouse. Upton Sinclair's novel, The Jungle, had come out not too, right around then. And so people were disgusted with slaughterhouses. So this is not the fat of your grandmother at her spinning wheel. This is a new fat, modern and clean. And women, they leapt to it. So it was first marketed to Americans as Crisco, replacement of lard. Then there was the production of margarine in the 20s and 30s and 40s. It was cheaper than butter, and it was marketed as a product not just for poor people but also in high class kitchens. Margarine has a place even in wealthy homes. Those were the advertisements at the time. So margarine came to make huge inroads on butter. And then in the 40s, scientists discovered how to stabilize just regular oils, like very light hydrogenation, so that you could put oil in a bottle and sell it to housewives for frying. And this was Crisco oil, Mazola oil, canola oil, not canola, sorry, Mazola. And, I can't remember all the brands at the moment. But then those came onto the market. There's various ways in which these vegetable seed oils, but they're more rightly called seed oils. And I should have said we're talking about soybean, safflower, sunflower. Soybean is the major one used in America right now. They really received their major boost when the American Heart Association, as I mentioned, started to recommend them in 1961 instead of saturated fats. Well, I dug down into the history of the American Heart Association and discovered that in 1946, when it was kind of a nothing organization, because remember, heart disease was new and there weren't that many cardiologists yet. They there was Procter and Gamble came and said, "Let's have a partnership and we'll make you the designated beneficiary of this Walking Man contest on the radio with Jack Benny." And according to their own history, which I somehow obtained, and I don't think there's ever been a copy available on the internet since, according to their own company history, that was the big bang of mega money for them, and into their coffers flew millions of dollars, and they were able to transform themselves, according to their own history, into a small sleepy organization, into the national powerhouse that they are today. It was a huge boost to them. And not too many years later, here they are recommending that Americans consume vegetable oils over saturated fats. There's even a letter that I have from one scientist accusing the American Heart Association at the time, his name was Campbell Moses, of holding, and he says, "How can you?" He's like, "That is just rank commercialism for you to be holding a bottle of Crisco oil in an advertisement." So there was clearly a lot of active promotion of these oils. The oils themselves marketed themselves um, as medical, like a kind of medicine, the kind of pharmaceutical. There's a full page Mazola ad that I reprint in my book, which says, take this page to your doctor to get a prescription for vegetable oils. There was a little book that was put out by Ansel Keys' colleague named Jeremiah Stamler, called, it's a little red leather book called Your Heart Has Nine Lives, where he advocates for vegetable oils, produced by the Corn Oil Association and distributed to thousands of doctors all over the United States. So there was just a real marriage of vegetable oil money and scientists to promote these oils. And the fear of heart disease had many people switching over to those oils. And then there's, other events that happened in the 80s and 90s to further push Americans greater fear of saturated fats, more and more unsaturated, polyunsaturated vegetable oils, which I go into in my book. I mean, there's various different events, but what I discovered in my research was, first, those cancer effects that I told you about. They should be discussed more, because that is truly the only data we have from randomized controlled clinical trials on humans and their mortality effects, which are the most rigorous kind of outcomes. So I think it's fair to say seed oils cause cancer.
Do we know the physiology there?
Um, well, so let's discuss that when I talk about its other effects, which I discovered from an industry scientist. I was at a meeting and he said, "Well, you know about the toxic effects of seed oils, don't you?" And I was like, "No, do tell." And so, in order to tell this story, I have to explain that when we got rid of trans fats are a byproduct of the hydrogenation process, right? So when we got rid of trans fats, we were getting rid of hydrogenation, or partial hydrogenation. But remember, hydrogenation had been found in order to stabilize these oils, right? Without the stabilization, they're unstable. So what does that mean? It means that if you pour a big thing of soybean oil into a vegetable fryer, which is what they had to do when they got rid of trans fats, and they're still doing presumably, you have this highly unstable oil. And especially in conditions of light but heat, especially, remember your high school scientific experiment, you have to heat things to speed up the reaction. They will oxidize, and they oxidize like crazy. I mean, every single one of those fatty acid molecules, which has multiple double bonds along it, those double bonds open up and they attach to oxygen. That's oxidation. And that is happening. There are hundreds of oxidation products that are produced as a result of heated oils. And those oxidation products include known toxins. So, acrolein, which is the one that's found in cigarettes, and why some people say, seed oils is like smoking 8 cigarettes a day. And then the other big one that I discovered is aldehydes. So aldehydes are known toxins to cause heart disease and cancer. They're highly unstable, very, very hard to study. I was able to talk to a researcher before she retired at the University of Michigan who was looking at these oxidation products in fast food restaurants around her campus. She discovered there are hundreds of these products in a piece of fried chicken alone, that those oxidation products enter into your bloodstream and you absorb them, and that they cross through the blood brain barrier. So, what does oxidation do? It drives massive inflammation in the body. So, it, this is yet to be shown in human experiments, but there are cases of people having body-wide sepsis and cancer as a result of consuming these polyunsaturated oils. There are two ones that are in most oils that are called linoleic and linolenic acid. Both of them, there's been a tendency sort of in this space to focus on linoleic, but linolenic is just as bad and equally prevalent. They have multiple double bonds, and those double bonds are what makes them unstable and subject to oxidation. So, I mean, just to give you a feeling for how real this is, this industry source I had, he said, "You don't realize these oxidation and perioxidation products, they build up on worker uniforms in fast food joints. When those uniforms are placed in the back of trucks to take them to the dry cleaner, they spontaneously combust because those products, those oxidation products, are so unstable. They clean them, but they're still, when they put them in the dryers, they spontaneously combust in the dryers. So they had to develop. They were also, these chemicals were building up on the walls of the fast food joints like a shellac like kind of substance, which, by the way, was also found in rat experiments fed these oils. They would, it's so disgusting to even say this, but they would find that their feces were like, had this shellac like substance that glued them to the bottom of the cage. So there had to be new cleaners invented to get the stuff off the walls. There was solutions in places like McDonald's and Burger King where they use nitrogen blankets on top of the fryers in order to prevent the fumes from getting out and building up on the walls. I should also say, we're also protecting the health of the workers who are breathing in these fumes. And in Asia, and in the Netherlands, there's a bunch of studies showing that especially women or fast food workers in enclosed spaces who are using these kinds of fryers have quite significantly higher rates of lung cancer. They put these fast food restaurants put silicone beads inside the oil itself to absorb the oxidation products. I mean, these oxidation products are real and recognized by the industry, and now people are waking up to it. And I feel really proud to have to have reported this. But and I'm really happy that we're now seeing like people at a national level talking about seed oils. I think they should never have been recognized as like sort of generally recognized as safe status in the United States for ingredients. And it's just clear to me these should never have been generally recognized as safe.
All right, so these oils oxidize easily, very unstable. How much of that oxidation occurs in use by the consumer? And then how much of it occurs as it's being made? Because the way I understand it, these oils go through quite a process before you even get the bottle.
Yeah.
So I can imagine there's a lot of oxidation pre purchase and post. Do you know a lot about that?
I have actually visited a vegetable oil factory. And then the manager who allowed my visit begged me not to use it in my book because he said he would get fired, and so I relented. But I've been to one of those factories, so I can tell you what goes on there. They control for oxidation in that process, which has many, many steps. Because what comes out of pressing beans or seeds to make into oil is sort of a gray sludge. So it needs to be deodorized, winterized, bleached, stabilized, and then everything that you've taken out of it has to be then supplemented with color and vitamins and things that have been taken out of the oil. So it goes through like maybe a 10-step process to be made, including the uses of a chemical chelate if you're doing hydrogenation. But I think those products they're not oxidized when delivered. I think that happens when oils are left out. And even things like nuts and seeds, which contain these same fatty acids, they're called omega-6 fatty acids. Nuts and seeds go rancid for the same reason. And they just go bad over time, even if there's no cooking or heat involved. But especially in cooking, uh, there's just a massive speed up of the oxidation reactions.
Okay, we talked about trans fats, and the way I understand it, at this point in the US, I believe they're fully banned,
Yes.
but I know they can also be snuck in if they're below a certain percentage.
Under zero point 0.5 grams
Okay,
is translated into 0 on the food label.
got it. So that's important. Talk about the grace period. I think there was a certain number of years when they decided to ban trans fats that they were still allowed to use them
Right.
as they're phasing them out. And then you confirm now they're banned other than that sneaky small percentage.
0.5 grams. But I would imagine most of the hydrogenation factories have been shut down. I mean, that's not I haven't looked into that, but if you have a giant factory producing a substance that's banned, you're not going to keep that running. I like that would seem illogical to me. But one of the things that I covered in my book was like, what did industry? There was a huge panic in industry when the alarm went up about trans fats. There was a big effort to quash it. Like, of course, right? I spoke to scientists whose careers were ruined by what's called the Institute for Shortening and Edible Oils, which is the trade group for vegetable oil manufacturers. And let's just understand who the players are here. Unilever, Bunge, um, ADM, Monsanto. I mean, these are huge, giant multinational companies. Their trade group hired scientists, some of whom I spoke to, who said it was their job to go and harass other scientists at conferences if they raised anything negative about vegetable oils. I mean, literally, like stand up and harass them. I went to a vegetable oil conference where I saw this playing out with a Unilever scientist who just gave the person on stage such a hard time. One of the scientists I interviewed said, it just made you paranoid about your work. They would nitpick every single detail and you just became too afraid to even publish anything. And then he just got out of the field altogether. That's how you suppress any opposing science, right? So, but when they could no longer avoid when these companies could no longer avoid the concerns raised about trans fats, which is a whole story in of itself, but it was truly the biggest reformulation in the food industry in probably 50 years. I mean, it was huge because these oils, then hydrogenated, are in every packaged bagged food product. If you go up and down the supermarket aisles, chips, cookies, crackers, everything has seed oils in it, all frozen foods. I mean, it's just in everything. And then suddenly they had to find alternative ingredient, that was just, the absolute bedrock ingredient in their industry. They were in a complete panic. I mean, I went to industry conferences where there was like stand after stand after stand. Okay, this is our low linolenic oil that we've made from genetically modified soybeans, and here's one that's a mix of palm oil, which is more stable, and other oils that were, here's our high oleic sunflower oil. Here's our interesterified oil, where we actually swap around on individual triglycerides. We swap around the fatty acids. I mean, there was just every kind of solution. But the problem was all those solutions were expensive. Changing each individual fatty acid every single triglyceride is really it was really expensive. So what most fast food companies did when I last checked in on them, they were just using plain old soybean oil with all the attendant worries and harms associated with that. So, there has been some move towards like you can't put a product on a shelf that is just an oil because it's greasy, it doesn't hold up, it doesn't provide shelf stability. So you have to now. I think there's more. Most products probably have a blend of some kind of more stable fat. Usually, they like to use palm oil, which is not really an oil. It's more of a solid, very high in saturates. So um, yeah, it was a huge change for the industry, but I'm not sure that they're making products that are any healthier. I mean, what they should really do is just go back to whole natural animal fats, which is what used to be used in products. But they can't do that because of the cap on saturated fats, which prevents those fats from re entering the food supply.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand the nuance here. So, trans fats were banned. They had to pivot the whole industry and chemical changes they would do or put different blends of oils together. But I still want to fully understand stability now with vegetable oils. Like if you go to the grocery store and you see the aisle where it has like all the different vegetable oils, I assume before because of the hydrogenation or partial in that case, they were more stable. But now if they're not doing that, how are those oils staying on the shelf?
That's a good question. I mean, previously, in order to put those oils on the shelf, they had to do something called touch hydrogenation, which was very light hydrogenation. So, the degree of more hydrogenation meant more solid. Like your something that was highly hydrogenated would be like a chocolate coating or something. Something like an oil was using light touch hydrogenation, so very low in trans fats. The more hydrogenation, the more trans fats you produce. So it might be that level of the level of trans fats is enough to get under the label. I mean, I don't know what the answer is. It's a good question.
Okay. And you mentioned soybean oil, the pivot to using more of that in, I think it was fast food. So soybean oil is just generally more stable than some of the other seed oils.
No, it's just the cheapest, and in the United States, it's the cheapest oil, so it's used in most industrial settings. Like if you go look at your favorite restaurant and see what they put out in their garbage, it's usually gigantic cans of soybean oil.
So because they can't partially hydrogenate it, is it being changed up more frequently? Because it's obviously going to be going rancid quicker.
You do not detect that kind of rancidity in the flavor. So actually, um, no, there's no changeover required of restaurants in their oils. Ironically, it's the big chains like Burger King and McDonald's who like have standards about re uh, changing over their oils more frequently because they're aware of the health risks on some level. It's probably your like little mom and pop stir fry place or local Chinese restaurant that is using really old oils with ever increasing amounts of degradation products in them. And there's really no way to tell.
Right. So the difference before would have been because of the processing, it wouldn't have oxidized as easily. We're not tasting the difference, but likely the oils in these mom and pop restaurants are going to be worse for us than they were before.
Yes. I mean, that's the great irony about getting rid of trans fats. We thought that would improve the health of a nation, but I think the subheaded in my book that I wrote is like out of the frying pan into the fire. Like the oils that we are using now in these restaurants and in all our prepared food are far more dangerous.
But to be clear, you're still anti trans fats for other reasons.
Yes. I mean, I don't believe there's any reason to consume seed oils. I think that, whether they're touch hydrogenated, more hydrogenated with trans fats or without trans fats. I don't think seed oils are doing anyone's health any favors at all. And so, I think we should return to whole natural fats, such as the ones that human beings use to eat and cook with for many, many millennia. And those were in the West, lard and tallow and suet. Those were the major fats that have been used.
Have you seen any data on use of these seed oils declining in recent years?
No.
Given information like your book being out there, and definitely in our world, it's being talked about quite a bit. It's almost on every podcast I do. We get into seed oils and vegetable oils. So hard to tell if it's hitting a broader array of people or if it's just within our niche, but definitely they're being talked about. And I'm wondering if that's affecting worldwide sales and
Yeah.
the amount of seed oils that are being made.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I haven't looked into the data, but I mean, recently RFK Jr. said something about seed oils, and he has millions of followers. It's certainly on the public consciousness in a way that it never has been before. And maybe even companies are reformulating, and maybe there's some consideration about going back to natural fats. And there's definitely some food brands that have launched um, based on being seed oil free. Some restaurants are advertising being seed oil free. I hope this issue doesn't go away and that there will eventually be some action taken.
All right. So animal fats at the top, seed oils at the bottom, avoid those. What about in the middle? Things like coconut oil, avocado oil, olive oil,
Yeah.
some of these other oils from plants, but they seem to get a pass in our world.
Well, let's talk about olive oil first. So these other oils that we've been talking, the seed oils, are polyunsaturated fats. The poly means multiple double bonds. Saturated fats mean, which is, butter, lard. Oh, forgot to mention butter being a major cooking fat for all of millennia, many millennia. Um, Saturated fats, animal fats, are saturated. Saturated means no double bonds because it's the molecule is saturated with hydrogens. Saturated fats are straight molecules like this. And they lay on top of each other, and that's why saturated fatty acids are solid at room temperature. The ones with multiple double bonds are all the double bonds kink the fatty acid chains, and they can't be close together, and that's why those are oils. So in between those is monounsaturated fats, mono being only one double bond. That means that there's less capacity for oxidation, only one double bond to open up and attach to oxygens. So when you look at the oxidation experiments that have been done in humans, and most of this work is done in humans, you see high oxidation in effects in polyunsaturated fats, almost no oxidation in saturated fats, and an in-between amount in olive oil. All of the main fatty acid in olive oil, it's called oleic acid. So that is the most stable of the oils. And that is why I think olive oil is good for using in cold applications like salad dressings. But I still wouldn't feel great about heating it because it will produce some oxidation products. So things like avocado and what was the other one you mentioned?
I mentioned avocado, olive, coconut.
Okay, so let's just say avocado. There is another one that's out there, but avocado is more like oleic. So a little bit lower, but it's still got multiple double bonds. I'm not really a fan of it. I mean, I still think that it's still multiple double bonds, and any of the double bonds can open up and attach to oxygen. Coconut oil really probably shouldn't be called oil because it's 89% saturated fatty acids. So, just to understand, like, all fats are a combination of different fatty acids, and um, coconut oil is, let's just say, 90% saturated. So it just tends to be a solid at room temperature, and that's a safe fat.
Let's bring palm oil in. Maybe that was the other one you were thinking of. You mentioned it earlier. There's controversy around it. And I know you've talked about that being something, I forget what group it was that was causing the controversy there. But there's also controversy when it comes to rainforests and the orangutans and destroying their habitat. So I'll have you talk about that one.
Yeah, there's environmental concern about the destruction of the habitat of orangutans in order to plant palm plantations. Palm plantations are mainly in Indonesia and Malaysia. There has been a big effort to keep palm oil and coconut oil out of the United States because they compete with our own domestic fats. And so there's various efforts that I described, like going back to the 50s, which were like anti-tropical oil legislation to keep out the competition. In the 1980s, there was an interesting twist. I mean, I actually traveled to Malaysia to go see a palm oil plantation and talk to the people who had been dealing with the science there. What they did is the U.S. still wanted to keep palm oil out. Uh, it's really quite useful in for the ultra processed food industry. It's not really something that people consume individually much. Um, so there was a whole campaign to in the scientific literature where it was paid for by the American Soybean Association in large part to villainize uh, palm and coconut oil. And it was a trade campaign, as I say, it was a trade campaign wrapped in a scientific, with a scientific veneer, right? So they used the science to malign tropical oils, and there was high level meetings and summits, and I think it was resolved finally, and there was a deal that was struck in Hawaii at some hotel where they ultimately they allow these oils to stay in the market, but they had suffered and been tarnished almost irreparably by this campaign. Um, which had also led to another campaign by this Omaha millionaire who thought he had saved himself from heart disease by eliminating all saturated fats from his diet. He puts out full page advertisements in all major US newspapers saying we have to get tropical oils out of all of our food. And there were pictures of all the different packaged foods with them, and it was Nabisco products um, and others. And this triggered a barrage of phone calls into the Nabisco headquarters, such that they removed all of the saturated fats from their products, or I think they put in hydrogenated vegetable oils instead. So that was like yet another boost to hydrogenated vegetable oils. But it really was about a trade war. There was a lot of turf. Soybean oil producers want their product to be sold in the United States, and they didn't want competition from foreign competitors. It's just a wild ride out there in the world of what you think is nutrition science.
There's a dark backstory, it seems, to all this.
Yeah. I mean, that's why, I am interested in nutrition science and reading all the science, but I really think it's important to pull back the curtain on some of the motives behind the science, because people don't understand that there are just many forces at work that are really not about health or about science. It's there are just many interests and even ideologies that are behind some of uh, the studies and publications and that we see. And I think it's fascinating to me, and I think that people enjoy like understanding the backstory.
No, I definitely do. Let's talk about the good side of fats, or at least for most people, the way they look at them, which is the omega 3s. How do you look at those as part of a healthy diet?
Well, just relating it to the discussion that we just had about seed oils, there is this thing called the omega 3 omega 6 ratio, and which if there's too many omega 6s, those are the seed oils, or even they you can get them through nuts, a lot of peanut butter. Um, if there's too many of those coming into your diet, they take the spot in this cell membrane and displace the omega 3s. So you are not getting the benefit of omega 3s if your diet has too many omega 6s. It's just I talked to this really the foundational researcher in this field named Bill Land, and he said, the problem is not, you do not need to supplement with omega 3s. You just have to stop the tsunami of omega 6s that are coming into your diet. You can get sufficient omega 3s on a regular diet, even without fish, if you are not taking in all those omega 6s. So, I don't think omega 3 supplements are necessary. And they also have a problem of oxidation. They're the same multiple double bond fatty acid molecules as omega 6s. So they will go rancid, they will go bad, they will oxidize. You don't know if you're getting in that little capsule you're buying, you don't know if that's oxidized. Plus, I'm against them for sustainability reasons because the omega-3 factories, and I visited one in Peru. They go out and they troll for all the little fish, the sardines and other little fish, and they use that to make omega-3s. And that those little fish are the foundation of the whole sea colony of life. They're what the birds eat, what the larger fish eat, and we've seen real collapses in those populations as a result of those little fish being just fished out of the waters. So, yeah, I don't think we should supplement with omega 3s. Also, there were large clinical trials trying to show a benefit from omega 3s in preventing heart disease, and they could not show a benefit from the omega 3 capsules. There may be some protective benefit from eating the fish itself, but you are not getting that benefit in omega 3 supplements.
So when it comes to you and the way you look at omega 3s for your body, are you just having fatty fish periodically to make sure you have that balance?
Um, yeah, I'd like to have like sardines or, I'll have like canned fish sometimes. I think that we don't see omega 3 deficits in people who are carnivore and not eating fish. So I'm not sure. There may be enough omega 3s again in an environment with new omega 6s. You might just be fine with the amount that you can get from meat.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch a full episode. I'll see you over there.
They ignored the trials showing the low fat diet didn't work. They ignored the trials showing that replacing saturated fat with unsaturated vegetable oils did not have any effect on reducing heart disease or cardiovascular mortality. And that's the way they arrive at the conclusion.